Welcome back to Fixing Furniture. Today my project is working on this damaged stretcher. You can see that a dog has chewed on this and really taken away a lot of the wood. There are two ways to solve this problem, and I'm going to show you both ways, and we'll compare the results at the end, and you can decide which route you want to go when you're repairing a chair like this. If you're hiring a professional, this will also show you which way you'd like them to repair it. And if you're watching this just for pure entertainment, I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned, I'll show you how it's done.
As a furniture repair business, we're opening the doors to our workshop to show you the tools and techniques to repair furniture.
The front rail here, you can see this has been broken off.
We give you tips to make your repair projects easier. Let's get into the workshop and start fixing furniture.
If you've watched some of our other videos, you know that taking furniture apart can be a real challenge. But this one's going to be really easy. I'll flip it upside down and show you why. With furniture that's made overseas, it's usually imported flat and assembled by the customer. So we've got bolts here and screws. I just need to undo those. Viewers frequently ask about the tools that I use, and the socket for an impact driver is really useful. You can see how easy it is to take these nuts off. I'll leave a link in the video description for you. So with the hardware of the two stretchers and the leg, I can now separate the parts and get this piece out. There we go. So I'm going to put this chair back together again so I can set it aside, and then we can focus on repairing the stretcher. The first approach I'm going to use to repair this chair is replace the stretcher. So I need to make an exact duplicate, but part of doing that is making sure that the grain pattern in the wood that I use is similar to this before I stain it. So while I've got this upside down, let me show you what the grain pattern looks like. The unfinished parts on the underside of a chair can help. So here you can see the grain is pretty consistent, and the wood here is actually lighter than everywhere else. So there's definitely a dark stain that's been put on here, but this looks like it could be something like mahogany. So I can either use mahogany or a birch is a good substitute. It makes a good fake mahogany. I'll move this out of the way and then we'll get to the wood pile. I label all my pieces at the end here so I can tell the species. This one's yellow birch, so we can try that. And here's a piece of mahogany, so we'll try those out. So you can see the mahogany here is a reddish tinge and the grain is very straight, but this board is obviously too small. The birch looks like it's the right length, so what I'll need to do is just rip the right width, and then for thickness it's just slightly too thick, so I'll need to plane it down a little bit. After making some shavings, I've now got a part that's the same thickness as the stretcher. I'm now ready to cut the joinery on the tenon, and if we take a really close look at it, you can see that it's at different angles. So there's no way I can use a machine on this. I have to cut this by hand. To cut accurate lines like this, what I use is a Dozuki saw. It's a Japanese style saw, and I buy mine on Amazon. This is from Gokyujo. You can buy them online, and the blades are replaceable as well, so it's a great tool to use. I've also got a common woodworking tool. This is a T-bevel, and I'll use this to mark out the lines that I need to cut. I just line this up on the board here, line this up on the angle here, lock that in, and now I can transfer that exact same line over to here. Now, I need the right distance, so I've got a tenon that's long enough. So I'll take up my regular square, line these parts up here, and then what I need to do is transfer the mark from here over to this side. So when I do this, I like to use millimeters. So I'm going to measure, that is 12 millimeters, right here. So now what I can do is move this aside, draw my line across here, and that's the first line to start with. That's the most difficult one to locate. Now what I can do is rotate this. I've got a starting line here. I just take this line across here, and this is probably a different angle, which it is. So get that angle lined up here. Take my line here, put the T-bevel on, and then draw a line across here. So now I've got that line the same, this line the same, and I'll keep going around the piece and doing the same thing until I get a line all the way around. So my last line here, the test that I've done this right is by looking at where the lines meet up, and there you can see it's lining up perfectly. So I've got this line all the way around. We're all set to go. So we've got the perimeter here for what's called the shoulder. Now what I need to do is draw the lines for the angle on the tenon, because you can see this doesn't come out straight. So I'll get that lined up as well here. So I visually line this up so that my T-bevel is set at the right angle, but I need to measure the distance here from the edge to the tenon. I find the easiest way to do that is with calipers. So on the end of a caliper, you've got this gauge. So I can use that gauge to transfer the line over to this piece. So that's my starting point. And then use the T-bevel to draw that line. So there's the start. The width of the tenon is 22 millimeters. And then again, use the T-bevel. I'll go from this side this time. And again, I'm going to use calipers just to double check my measurement. So I get this accurate. Yep, that looks good. Now I'm going to cut this a little bit heavy, meaning a little bit thicker than it should be. And that way I can pare it down with a chisel and get it fitting nice and tight in the chair. I'll continue to do this around, get the angles right, and then we're ready to cut it. So I've got the tenon marked out on all sides, and the last thing I need to do is just draw lines between these lines here. So I've got a rectangle at the end, and I know where the tenon's going to be. To cut this most accurately, what I like to do is angle this piece so I've got a plumb line here. It's perfectly vertical. It makes it easier for me to saw. So get this lined up in the vise. And then with a Japanese saw, it cuts on a pull stroke. So what I'm going to do is start at this corner and cut my line down here. Once I've got that line across, then I'll work down this line here, and I'll work all the way around this piece to cut out the tenon. The last step is to round off the corners here, and the easiest way to do that is with a flush cut saw. This is another Japanese saw, and what I do is just undercut the corner just a little bit on each of these corners, and then come back with a chisel and then knock off the corner. And because of the grain, I do need to trim this back a little bit as I go down. And then what I'll do is work on the other end, do the same thing, and we'll test fit this in the chair. The stretcher is now ready to test, and what I've done is I've loosened off the bolts here so I can move this leg and get the part in and out. But before I do that, I want to ask you, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. 66% of our viewers aren't subscribers yet. And if you subscribe, you'll get to see bonus content where I post photos and polls, and you can engage in some conversation with us. Let's test out this part, see how it fits. So this is the back part here. I'll start putting this piece in. That's almost seated. And here, oh, that's a little too tight. So I'll pull this out. You can see here it's rubbed. There's an area here, I just need to trim a bit. I'll just pare this away with a chisel. It doesn't take much when you've got sharp chisels. And we'll try it again. And I notice in here there's a little bit of glue residue right at the back of the mortise. So I'll just clean that out a little bit. And maybe that'll help this part seat so the shoulder is flush. Okay, so this goes in here. No, it's not quite flush there. Ah, there we go. That's nice and tight. Okay, I've got a bit of a gap here, and I don't like seeing light through it, so if I trim a bit off the back, that should take care of it. Okay, there we go, all trimmed up, nice tight fit. With the stretcher fit in place, all I need to do is countersink some holes and it's ready for the screws to be installed. Then it comes down to staining and finishing. And I will show you those steps, but first, is there a way to repair this without having to go through all the woodworking? I've got a woodworking background, so this for me is a skill that I've already got. But is there a way to save this? This is the second approach that I'm going to use. I'm going to use something called epoxy putty to try and repair this and disguise the repair, and we'll see how that turns out. Now, this piece, fortunately, is strong enough that we can work on it, but there is another piece that I've shown in another video where a puppy actually chewed through a whole stretcher, and it required turning on a lathe. I'll leave a link in the video description for that one because it was a difficult repair. I think you'll enjoy that video. I've got my epoxy putty tube here, and I've got some other supplies. Epoxy putty, when it dries, is about as hard as wood, so it's good for shaping and carving. In fact, I've done another repair where I show how to carve a profile that was missing a piece of wood. I'll leave a link in the video description. The supplies I've got here are a flat board to help make sure that this is as flat as possible when I get the putty in. I don't want any voids in it. I've got a putty knife, some gloves, and of course a respirator. Whenever you're working with epoxy products, you need to make sure you're wearing a respirator with organic cartridges to protect your lungs. This has now been drying for about 45 minutes. It cures in 60, so it's not quite finished drying yet, but it allows me to manipulate it while it's still pretty firm. So we'll get out a plane and make it smooth. So I'm just going to plane a little bit at a time as I go around this. You can see it's rocking a fair bit. So that should get it more firm. So you can see I'm taking off the high points here. It's getting more flat, but because I built it up higher than I needed, I've got a fair bit to take off here. So here it's getting pretty smooth. On this side here, it's getting smoother. You can see the odd divot in here. On these larger surfaces, it's going to take a little bit more work. If you try to do this with a chisel or something else, you're going to end up with gouges in it. You could also go through and sand it down, but it will take you a very long time to sand it. Now it's just taking me a minute, but you can see here I'm starting to take the finish off the wood, and here there's some wood that's protruding. So I'm getting close. I've still got a bit of a lip here, but a little bit more planing here, and that should get it flat. I'm down here where I'm taking the finish off on this side and on this side. So that's now giving me a smooth surface. I can turn this over and work on the other side. I now have 4 flat sides on this filled area. I just need to round over the edges so that it matches the rest of the profile, and on the new piece I need to round over the edges too. So 2 different ways to be able to produce these, but the finishing process is another task. How do I get this wood to match this wood? How do I get this filler to match this and disguise the fact that I've patched it all? Well, let's get to it. First thing I'm going to do is put a little bit of vinegar on this just to clean it off. Vinegar is good for cleaning off epoxy before it fully cures. It's just a little bit sticky right now. I think that was from when the epoxy was on my gloves. Okay. So with that out of the way, I've got acrylic stains here, and I like using acrylic stains. The first thing I want to do is get a reddish color on this birch. So I've got a rosewood and a mahogany. So we can try each of these and see which one's going to be best to get that red. So I'll just take a cloth here, fold it up a few times, and let's test it out. Okay, we'll start with the mahogany. Put a little bit here, rub it off, and that's what we're getting there. It does look a little bit red. We'll try the rosewood. The rosewood's looking a little more brown. I think the rosewood is a better match to this here, so I'll just lightly sand that off and put the rosewood on, and that's our first step. You can try some of this acrylic stain on the epoxy, but I'm doubtful it's really going to do anything. Let's see what happens here. It is taking it. Okay, well, that's a good start. I'll put that on the rest of it, and we'll go from there. I've let this sit for about 15 minutes. That's all it really takes with these, which is part of the reason I like using it. And next what I'm going to do is apply a darker coat. So I've arranged these so this is the underside of these pieces. So if I get this wrong for some reason, then I can reverse it. It's not going to be seen. So that looks like it's going on pretty well. Giving me the tone that I need. You see, this wouldn't work if I didn't put that reddish tone underneath that is the same as the wood this original finish was put on. Okay, now I'm starting to wipe it off. So I need to put it on and let it sit. You see I've got some streaks here. So I'll continue on across this piece and just be patient with it and make sure I'm not overbrushing it. Let that dry and we'll see what that looks like. So it needs to be a little more intense than that. So I'll just let it sit for a second. Let it soak in before I wipe it off. So if I do one side, get it all on, and then I'll wipe the excess. So how does that compare? It's looking pretty good. I think I need to let it sit just a little bit longer when I get to these other sides here. But I think we've got our solution. So I'll let these sit and dry. This one here is the birch, you can tell by the end here, and it will get a little lighter as it dries, but when a top coat goes on, it'll match that other one. The great thing about all this is it washes up with just water. So just like you're doing art painting at home, just some water, clean out the brushes. If you need, a little bit of soap, and you're all done. No toxic chemicals. It's really a great product. The stain is now dried for about an hour, and I put some stain over top of the finish on this piece I repaired, and I need to wash that off so the lacquer will adhere properly. Once I put the lacquer on these, we can compare the two and see how they turned out. I also need to drill pilot holes in this piece so I can put the screws through, I'll get that done first and then move on to the lacquer. With the finish on, I can see there's a couple of voids here, so I'm going to use burn-in wood filler. This is the best type of wood filler to use when you're doing finishing because you can tint it and get it filled so you got the right color. If you're using filler that's not a burn-in wood filler, what you end up doing is getting the stain incorrect because it absorbs the stain much faster than the wood. So this will just get rid of those minor imperfections. If you've never seen burn-in wood filler before, it's a wax product, and it's just a matter of melting the wax into the void and then coming back. I use a plastic razor blade and just rub that over the top, and that gets rid of the voids. Now, I did have one spot here, it didn't quite get in the void. And then what I'll do is I'll shoot one more coat of lacquer on top, just to seal it in. And then we'll take a look at both pieces. Both stretchers are now ready to look at, and I'd love to hear in the comments what your thoughts are on these. How would you approach solving this problem with the tools that you've got in your workshop, and which result do you like the best? So let's take a look at these. You can see this one's just slightly lighter than this one. And if we look at the texture on it, it's all nice and smooth across. And on here, there is a little bit of texture still on the finish. On the top here, you can see I filled the holes on this side with burn-in wood filler, but I didn't here, just to show you what that looks like. Back here, this is what it's like without the fill. And underneath, this is where I was a little bit light with the stain. I didn't fix that, just to show you what that looked like. So if you're using epoxy to fill this, probably should be sanding it down a little bit more than I did, and then use that burn-in wood filler on top to give yourself a good finish. So what stretcher would you use? I'm going to use the new stretcher. I'll put this in the chair, we'll take a final look. Here's a look at the stretcher that's been installed in the chair, and you can see how well it fits. But unfortunately there's a bit of bruising at the front here. What I'll do is I'll touch this up with a stain marker, and that'll make it less noticeable. If you haven't discovered stain markers before, I've got a whole video on that. I'll leave a link in the video description. This chair is now ready to go back to the customer. I hope you've enjoyed watching 2 different ways to repair a stretcher that's been chewed by a dog. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click over here and click on the bell icon, and you'll get notified every time we publish a video. I'll leave another video right here that I know you'll enjoy. Thank you for watching Fixing Furniture.